This is Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. When I think about the critical issues facing Black and Brown residents in the St. Louis area, I often ask the questions: how did we get here? What's holding us back? And how do we progress? At 9 PBS, we want to deepen our understanding and change the narrative. Join me as I look for answers and discover solutions on today's podcast. Writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." His words appeared in an essay in the New York Times in 1962. Today on Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel, we learn about an organization created to face, and I quote, "the racial trauma and pervasive effects of internalized and structural racism," end quote. Its creator and director, Rudy Nickens, joins me to explain why he believes the Institute for Black Liberation is so necessary for healing and true freedom. And this discussion takes an unexpected and emotional turn for me. That's next on Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel.
Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough.
Welcome back to another episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for subscribing. And even if you aren't a subscriber, I'm talking about my guest today, he will be before this is over. Even if you haven't clicked the subscribe button, thank you for watching and thank you for listening to this podcast wherever you get your podcast. But I really like to watch on YouTube because you get all my facial expressions that way. So we appreciate you, and especially those comments. We really like the comments. That tells us that you listened, you had some thoughts, and you care to share them. We appreciate that too. And if there is a topic or a guest you think we should have on this podcast, let me know that as well. So today, as I mentioned, this is an interesting title. Might make some uncomfortable. The Institute for Black Liberation. What is it? Where is it? My guest today is Rudy Nickens, as I mentioned. And Rudy, I got to read because you have such...
You don't have to do all that.
I'm going to.
You really don't have to do all that.
I'm going to do some of it.
Less is better.
Less is better? Okay, well, I will cut this down because you see how this is how much I have, because he's done so much. Facilitator, educator, entrepreneur, cultural diversity, business management, community development, workforce diversity, all of that. All of that. But was your favorite either between the Sunshine Inn and the St. Louis Black Rep? You can't even choose one, can you? You've done so much.
Yeah, I've never, ever had a job that I didn't love. I'm so lucky that I get to say that.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And you, I think there's some sensibility you have that they were all different titles, but the same thing.
You know,
right?
Every job that I've had, every bit of work that I do is sort of mission aligned with who I am. And so whether I've done it as a restaurateur wearing an apron and Birkenstocks, or as vice president of St. Louis 2004 in neckties and suits and those places, or any other job I've ever had working for the state, when I was chief diversity officer for MoDOT, VP of St. Louis Black Rep. It doesn't matter what I've done. It's all been about doing what I can do to make things go better for people.
And I want to talk about the values of the Deaconess Foundation. That is the organization under which the Institute for Black Liberation is. But the name's bold. When I saw it, I thought I had to reconcile Deaconess Foundation, faith-based organization, with the Institute for Black Liberation, which sounds controversial to some. But you're like, it's not. It's not. What is it?
So, Carol, we've gone back a long time. And I think about the days back when I was working for St. Louis 2004 and running the Minority Corporate Network. And you and I did a lot of interviewing with people and bringing in corporate leaders and successful Black, storytelling. It was really important, right? Because one of the things that has happened in much of the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work is that it has left out the need for for Black people to get particular amounts of resourcing around healing the hurts of living in environments characterized by systemic racism and white supremacy. So as much as I have wanted to always participate at every level of DEI work, and I will, I've done everything, it's just my personal commitment is to also make sure that there are the things that Black people need to know and do and learn and have resources about to recover from and have our whole lives. And that's what the Institute's about.
It's really a revolutionary thought, because so much of the work has been about inclusion, which is important.
Absolutely.
Because I deserve a seat at the table. I deserve equal pay. I deserve to be able to show up at work and not be called the N-word and not be mistreated or ignored. I deserve all those things. Black people deserve all those things. But we've not spent as much time, and maybe there's been that time, healing.
Yeah.
And healing is a buzzword now. Mental well-being, those are buzzwords,
Absolutely.
right? But so in that way, it's revolutionary.
Yeah, the fundamental piece about the Institute is that we have to look at what is the level of internalized racism that we have adopted. Mm-hmm. What are the ways that living for centuries and centuries and centuries of in societies characterized by anti-Blackness, et cetera, that we have bought some of it. We have been hurt by it, and we've adopted some of the behaviors that go with it. And unless we can do the work to do our personal work of healing, we actually can't do the kind of liberation and big life things that we all deserve.
And policy changing
Absolutely.
and making and all of that.
Absolutely.
So when I am told I believe I was 7, 8, or 9, I was in elementary school, by one of my white friends' parents. It was her mother.
Yeah.
Who said to me in the car, I'm sitting in the back seat, she was driving us home from something, and she said to me that I was pretty for a Black girl.
Yeah, that.
And I went home and I told my mother, because I took it as a compliment.
Yeah.
7. I was 7. Yeah. And I went home and I told my mother.
Yeah.
And my mother, who is an introverted and shy woman, I'd never seen her a level of frustration bridging upon anger. And she said to me, that is not a compliment. And she then explained to me why it wasn't. Yeah. That is racial hurt.
Yes, and yes, and
help me heal today, Rudy.
So let me say that. So I grew up in Washington, D.C., and the period that I grew up in, it was still very, very chocolate. It's kind of latte now, but it was really chocolate city. And so I didn't have white classmates. I didn't have white families in my neighborhood. I didn't have contact with white people at all. I was just in an all-Black world, because D.C. was that for me. I mean, at my age, it was still like, this is all we had, right? It's all we were. It was great. So it wasn't until I actually came here to go to college that I was in a predominantly white environment. And when I experienced the kind of things that you spoke about blatant or microaggressive content of racism coming from white people to me, that's when I used to think was the first time I experienced racism. Now, but you know it's not true, because even though that white parent who said, Carol, you're pretty for a Black girl, that wasn't the first time someone said that to you, only it stuck out because it was a white person saying it. So we have sufficiently adopted the language and the behavior and the attitude of racism that we don't need white people around to pass it on to us. So even though I had heard these things from white people when I was in college, one day I realized, well, that wasn't the first time somebody said I wasn't beautiful or brilliant or smart or good or deserving. That wasn't. I'd heard that my entire life from different people, but they happened to all look like me.
Right.
So I didn't call that racism. In fact, it is the exact same content of racism, whether it's delivered by a white person or a person in your family. Which
is then when I have my my oldest son, who same father. I got to make that point, because one is very light, your complexion, and the other is chocolate. And the light one, a Black woman, said to me when I brought him to work, I was still on maternity leave, don't let him in the sun. He's just right. Exactly. She said, he's just right. Don't let him in the sun. And I could not gather myself to tell her how offensive that was and ridiculous for her to say to me, a new mother, about my child and about herself. She was saying something about herself. That's internalized racism.
So, colorism, that dimension of internalized racism, it just runs rampant. And we have created entire institutions around it. We have created, policies and behaviors of who I can date and who I can marry, what I do to my children, and what social groups I can belong to. And, it has just gotten
and my own self-worth.
Exactly. It has gotten so ingrained into our communities. And we didn't call it racism. It was just like, this is our culture, this is our practice. But in fact, it is again, same content of racism, that if you look more European, look more like white people, have particular kind of hair, particular color, skin color, these things that then you're smarter or that you're more beautiful. And we have done a good job of trying to interrupt that within ourselves, but not all the way.
The natural hair movement is an attempt to interrupt that, to which my mother was appalled.
Of course.
My mother, who was from, both my parents grew up same small town in I call it Mississippi burning. That's how I describe it, because they grew up in Jim Crow South, in a violent environment. And my mother was appalled that I stopped relaxing my hair, that it was no longer straight. And she actually said to me, Rudy, I want to get this right. You are just forgetting everything we taught you. Yeah. And I thought, well, what have you taught me? That European beauty standards are what I should always, is that what you're, I didn't say any of that because I was trying to be respectful, but I was stunned that she framed it in that way.
Yeah, well, that's not an uncommon story, right?
Not an uncommon story at all. Yeah. Not an uncommon story at all. Racial trauma, because we when we talk about the Institute for Black Liberation, and I want to read what the website says, to give Black leaders the opportunity to name, reckon with, and heal from racial trauma and the pervasive effects of internalized and structural racism. Racial trauma is very heavy. Yeah. Describe what that would be for people who are wondering, is it being chased by the Klan? Is that racial trauma?
Just the presence of living in societies that think of us as less is traumatic. The violence that we have endured around racism, and violence has, not all of us necessarily have been beaten, but we've all witnessed enough of it, and so the witnessing of it is also traumatic. And every single harm done to us is literally recorded in our bodies. We carry the trauma in our bodies of being misused and being abused and being afraid that it might happen next, and the story that you had to tell your adolescent sons at a particular age is traumatic. You didn't want to do that. You didn't want to hurt them. You didn't want to take their innocence and youth and joy of living. But these are the things that we have to do. It's passing trauma along for the survival of the race, and we're not needing to be mad at ourselves about it. This is the way we have to strategize and cope. But let's not pretend we're not living with trauma in our bodies, in our minds, in our thoughts, and in many ways passing it along to the people we love.
After Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, we went to a prayer vigil. My pastor was speaking at the prayer vigil, who's been a guest on this podcast, Bishop G. Vincent Dudley Sr., and we took our youngest son, and he was 14. This is almost 10 years ago, of course, now. And he was so sullen on the way there, and I didn't understand. I was just bracing. There was tension in the car. And we get there, and he's disengaged. He doesn't want to stand close in the crowd. And all the while, Rudy, there's a car, maybe a Dodge Charger, blacked out windows, bass thumping music, driving slowly past the vigil. This was at the old courthouse. Right. Probably 3 or 4 times, and I could feel my son. Now it's gone from, is he being disrespectful, to I think he's afraid, and as a parent. And so I asked him a question, and he said to me, this is racial trauma, I think. You tell me if it is or not. He said to me, a boy was killed who looks like me, and you've got me out here in the open. And so so many times I've thought, Rudy, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And I thought, he's feeling like a target. He's feeling like we've exposed him and we're not protecting him. And he framed it in that way, that a boy who looks like me, and just black boy, and you've got me out here in the open, like I'm vulnerable. He was vulnerable.
So don't cry, don't cry, don't cry is the wrong response, Carol.
Oh, don't make me cry
You
now.
know,
Don't make me cry
you know,
now.
crying is one of the things that just needs
I
to
just
happen.
felt like I needed to be strong for him in the moment.
Yeah.
Did I think I was going to cry talking to Rudy Nickens today? I did not.
Yeah, I mean, it's there, right?
Right.
And people get confused about that when we give people permission and space and attention that allows them to cry. People feel like, that's the hurt.
Yeah.
It's the hurt healing.
Yeah.
The hurt is already inside of us. And anytime I see, have a chance to let my feelings go, to release myself of the stress that I'm carrying already, because you carry this about your boys all the time.
Yeah.
And anytime you get a chance to have the contradiction that says it is okay to feel this and to release this and not to carry this all the time. And that's one of the things that we care most about doing in the Institute.
Does this happen when the
all day long.
So the Institute, and Leah, my producer, I know there's tissue in this room somewhere. I know it just started in 2023, July.
September
rather.
Yeah.
And you, so how many cohorts have you had?
So we're in the first one as we speak.
Okay.
So the design is from September to May is a cohort, and we start with a 5-day very intensive in-person experience in September. We repeat that, a second immersion experience in the end of January, and then the third one is actually next week for this cohort. And in the months in between, we do little webinars and coaching sessions and deeper dives into topics virtually. But there's 15 days in person together that we spend September, January, and May.
What is the question? There are many, I am sure, that what are some of the questions that you are asking them to consider?
Yeah. So, we start with a lot of history, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the faculty is myself, the person who's been my mentor for the last 30 years. Her name's Dr. Barbara Love out of UMass Amherst. She's totally the answer. And then one of my other besties, his name's Cliff Jones from Portland, Oregon. So we three are the faculty. We've divided up like the different things we want to each lead about. So we start with, other than doing team building and connecting, and so the whole building a container for people to have each other and to be close and connected. Probably the first module that we do is the historical antecedents of anti-Blackness, because we want people to know that racism was created. Just as race was created, racism was created. It was created.
It's a construct.
Yeah, but it was created to justify what was happening around the world. As the age of exploration, Europeans were traveling around because they wanted, feudalism was collapsing. They wanted to have more things, and they went around the world and they discovered things like, wow, the continent of Africa has rubber and gold and ivory and cinnamon and cocoa, and we want these things.
Yeah.
We want these things for our wealth.
For ourselves.
Yeah, and so in order to extract the resources from the continent, to steal, in order to do that, they had to do violent things, and they had to create a justification for the violence. And so there are actually two institutions implicit in creating the racist ideology that we have. One is science, which they said that there's a hierarchy of race, and that there's race, and then that there's white people, and there's Asian people, and there's black people at the bottom. So a hierarchy
began that they are less than. They're not
exactly.
not human.
So you have to do that.
Yeah.
And then there's the church. So the church gave science gave the one justification for it, the scientific justification for the enslavement and the stealing and the ravaging and the stuff, and the church did the other one. Like, you should read some of those papal bulls, which say it is your job to tame these savage people and to take their resources. You're justified in doing so. In fact, including their own bodies. So it started somewhere, which is really good to know that it is not our inherent nature to be racist. None of us, not one single person on this planet is born inherently racist, but the society and the conditions that we inherited trained us inside of our roles. And our roles as black people, much of that was train us inside the roles of being victims, train us inside the roles of accepting this plight, trained us in the role of not knowing how to own our voices and our minds and our to respect ourselves and each other. So that's the internalized racism. But be clear, it was handed to us, and it was violently handed to us. I don't want to say here's a book, read about it. I mean, we were punished badly,
beaten,
for holding
murdered,
on to our humanness,
mutilated, all of that. And so you start with history, and talk to me too about when you were creating this, you and the board. Who did you think? Because clearly it says Black leaders, not just...
It's not just for Black leaders.
Okay,
Let me It's the Institution of Black Liberation, but it's when... So at the time when we decided to do this institute, I was board chair at the Deaconess Foundation at the time, and we got this grant from a large foundation that said, "Hey, you can do something different. So do something with it that's not your usual way of just handing money to grantees. Like do something." And most foundations don't have signature projects. They just give money to other people. So do something that you want to do in the space of race relations, and it would be really great. So. I just had this thought for a long time. I mean, I actually wrote the concept paper for this institute on Black liberation 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh!
And just sort of been working and waiting and trying to find the right place to launch it. I'm not going to name the names of the people in the community that turned me down.
But you know who you are.
You know who you are. You know who's like, yeah, I don't get that. It's not a good fit. And no, maybe I just couldn't communicate it, thoughtfully enough. But now I'm in a position as board chair at the Deaconess to say, I really want us to consider this. So the two other members of the faculty that I wanted to bring in, Barbara and Cliff, came in. We did a weekend for the board, and they said, great idea. Let's do that. So then I had to step off the board in order to come and be the director of the Institute.
And so you had an individual in mind, the demographic, if you will, or did you have the end result in mind?
No, so we did talk about it a lot. We had this funding, and what do we want to do? We want to do something for multiracial, because it could have been an institute that dealt with the ways that people of the global majority generally are treated and treat each other. So we could have had it that was inclusive of Latinos and Latinas and Asian BIPOC. We could have.
Because all that exists.
Because all that exists and all that's necessary and important. We could have done a generally DEI institute, period, so that we looked at racism and sexism and heterosexism and anti-Semitism, all that. We could have, and maybe we will at some point.
And those two exist.
And those two are necessary to do. But we decided, you know what? People will have the reaction that you said, this looks a little off to say something just for Black folk, right? Why can't we have something just for Black folk?
Because we need something.
Right. What's wrong with that? We have this resource and we have this need and we have someone who wants to lead it. So what's wrong with that? So we did a lot of work about do it. Yeah. So then we decided who would we do it for? And many people think it's just for people who are, quote, in leadership titles, and that is not the truth.
Okay.
So it is we decided that the criteria is that you had to live in the Deaconess footprint, which is St. Louis City, St. Louis County, or Metro East, St. Clair, the places where Deaconess does its work. And you had to be Black, and we decided to put an age bottom line. We decided so you have to be at least 25 years of age.
Okay.
I hope that will be a youth institute that comes sooner than later. But for lots of reasons, we wanted to work on people from age. So this cohort, the youngest person is 26, the oldest person is 83.
Oh my!
It's multi-generational. There are people of all people who are just starting out their careers. There are people who are retired. We have a handful of CEOs. We have a handful of people in public sector and private sector. I said retired, not just influencing the world the way retirees can do. It's really cool, and they it's rich because of the diversity within it.
I just and you said the word rich, and I thought as I was coming into the studio that this will be a rich conversation. And I'm telling stories about myself. It's my podcast, okay? Because I can look back over my life and know had I been liberated, right? Had my thoughts been liberated, had they not been weighted, and this is for far too many of us who somehow still manage to get into positions of and gain resources and become successful.
Absolutely.
Despite the weight of internalized racism, thinking that I'm not attractive, thinking that I am not gifted, I am not valued, I am not worthy, all those things that far too many of us think of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, the hurt is not prescriptive of what you will do with it. Some of us,
sure.
I'm going to just work extra hard. I'm going to show you. I'm
Absolutely.
going to show. And for some people, it's just like, what's the point? I'm defeated. So it's not like everybody responds to this conditioning in the same way. It's present for everybody, but there's a lot of individual behavior that shapes what we do with it. But when I say, like, one of the things that's rich about this is, like, Carol, think about the places where you're one of only a handful of black people, right? Think of, like, you're like this big group of folks and you might be the only black person or just a couple of us. All you can feel in those spaces is black, period. Because when the an ecosystem that is around you is so white and stuff, and you're like so aware that I'm the black girl in the room, I'm the black boy in the room. You'll think about that all the time. When you're in all black spaces, then you get to notice, I'm not just black. I'm black and male. I'm black and female. I'm black and gay. I'm black and elder. I'm black in this faith tradition, And so that's what's really cool about this. It's like we get one of the places where we can experience the multiple identities that we have.
The layers of who we really are.
We are, because none of us are just black, right?
Right.
And we have so much more that affects how we show up in the world and how the world sees us. So this is one of the places where, where I heard one of the participants say, there's no place that I've been where I've been able to talk about being a black queer person around black people. Like, it's just not to do. Or the elders that are like, that's what I love. One of the things I love about this.
And so often black people are in situations where we are editing ourselves.
Clearly.
The Deaconess Foundation says that it values health and well-being.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how liberation leads to health and well-being.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's a stupid question.
No. I mean,
to me, it's an obvious.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that I can have my whole self, first of all, that I can be free of the things that have worn me down from living in these toxic environments. It's like, stuff attaches to you, stuff that says, you ain't good, you ain't smart, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're not educable, all those things. So the more of that you can free of yourself, then you become healthier, period, right? That's just an automatic. And the more, let me say that working on our internalized racism is not in and of itself the answer to ending oppression. It is not. It's necessary, though. It still means we still need to do the work to dismantle systemic racism in the world. Right. But, think about all the ways that you have seen in your life people organize to try to do that, to try to end racism, and look at the ways that the unhealed hurts that we carry get in the way of being able to achieve our goal. And we want people to be able to, we're not competing with the activist community. We made it really clear, if there's an I zone and a we zone and an it zone, we're staying, our lane is the I lane. We work in individuals, cleaning up your own material. You will be a more effective leader. You will be a more effective activist. You will be more whatever you're doing if the more of yourself you get. Right. And so healthy, there's a whole dimension of internalized racism that has to do with how we think of ourselves. I'm not going to, if you don't think you're going to live past 50, why would you do healthy lifestyle, right? If you don't think that you're valuable at all, why would you care about, these things? Why would you save money? Why would you go to school? Why would you, we want people to be able to go oh, I deserve to have it all.
I'll never forget someone telling me, and this is a good 20 years ago. I used to be a columnist at the St. Louis American newspaper, and someone said to me, and it made me write a column. Black people don't go to the Muni. Yeah. And I remember literally, Rudy, looking around the room, are you talking to me? Yeah. Are those words coming out of your mouth? And that's editing ourselves. Some feel they don't belong everywhere. Now, the truth of the matter is you can go certain places and you will get stopped because those people don't accept you in that space. So that's sadly a part of our history and our conditioning. You know, the Sunset Town, it was a very real thing. You couldn't be in this place after dark. You didn't belong in this zip code. We bought our house 11 years ago and we were asked, what do you do for a living? Like we didn't belong in this expensive home. And so here we are in a space where we've internalized and saying to ourselves, I don't belong. Yeah. And that is insidious, is the word.
Yeah, there's so many places about that. Like, like you spoke about your mom and your parents in the Jim Crow era. We're actually a part of it too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were born into it as well, but we didn't endure as much as harshness of the did. But I remember being a young person, as there are places that my parents weren't allowed to go, that they talk about. We weren't allowed to shop in that store or go to this place. And so once the things had been lifted, they still refused to go. They didn't want me there then. I'm not going now. So that became part of my posture growing up. I got to learn that, like, no, that's off limits to us. Even as the de jure practices, the legal structures have been removed, the de facto practices continue to exist. And so we want to work on, well, maybe I do deserve to have this. And why would I keep something from myself that I want? Like, if the Muni is what I want, I'm going to the Muni, like, or anything else.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are those who would feel that two things. They need it but are hesitant to apply, or they don't think that it's not even proper phraseology. Like Black liberation is too close to Malcolm X. It's too close to... I wouldn't be surprised if there are Black people who would see this title, Institute for Black Liberation, and either be hesitant or feel like, well, that's inappropriate.
Yeah. It's if it were just simple, if it were not here's one of my stories when I was like in high school, and I was a good student with good grades and good test scores, and so my grandfather, I grew up in D.C., my grandfather said to me and my sister both, who were those students, honor students, national honors, blah, blah, blah. My grandfather said, wow, you got good grades and good stuff. You get to go to the good schools. You don't have to go to the Black colleges.
Oh.
I mean, really, in fact, they steered us away from applying to HBCUs because in their mind, HBCUs meant inferior. And they were like so proud of us because we could get into predominantly white schools. Now, everybody knows now that HBCUs produce more Black scholars than predominantly white schools, and that they're more nurturing and blah, blah, blah. They're less hostile. But there was a mentality that said, this is what's good and you should work to have that. And lucky you get to go to these places. So it took a lot of unlearning there, so that, my parents they meant well when they said these things, but they were inside their own pain.
For sure. Well, how does it fit into the overall goals of the Deaconess Foundation's values?
Yeah,
because they start with faith, of course.
Yeah. The Deaconess Foundation has been sort of associated with liberation and justice and anti-racism for a very, very long time. Bethany Johnson, the CEO of Deaconess, was the manager of the Ferguson Commission. That Starsky Wilson, the former CEO, was the one of the co-chairs of the Ferguson Commission. Like, liberation theology has been a part of the Deaconess's missional work for a very long time, and that is our commitment to raising young people, healthy young people, cleaning up and the things that keep us from having full lives, means this is consistent with the things that have to happen. We have a vision of 7 generations. It's going to take 7 generations to get us where we want to be.
7 generations.
Yeah. And we're committed. I don't want to be the spokesperson for the Deaconess Foundation. Get Bethany on
for sure
sometime, but this is. I mean,
this is a part of that goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a couple of last questions for you. And I would imagine that it's a complex answer, but how do you envision graduates of the Institute changing the landscape of the St. Louis region.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm excited about. I don't know exactly what that means yet, but for instance, if liberatory consciousness, that's the language that we use, that we're helping people to develop their liberatory consciousness, which means you apply this to everything you do. You have a fresh new lens of looking at the world and yourself that is about freedom and liberation and connectedness to other people. That's really a big deal. So, if we do, several of these institutes, at some point, I think there come a time when nothing happens in this community that affects the lives of Black people that at least one of us is not on the board or in the room, to deal with. Like people, speaking up about this, who have this information, who have this perspective, will have a major impact on how life happens for all of us.
Because imagine what liberated people do.
Exactly. It's the opposite of what hurt people do.
And talk to me lastly, again, and this is sort of into the previous question, but for those who may feel that this is the wrong route to take or may not think that it is necessary, who may feel that what Black people, this behavior we see, because they'll go right to crime, because that's like we're a one-trick pony. Who may think, well, that's just the result of bad parenting. That's just the result of, and fill in the blank. And it's not about internalized racism. It's not about racial trauma. They may think, just take them to school. Just be a better parent. Just stop beating your wife.
Well, just do that, please. Stop.
Yeah, how about all of that?
Stop beating your children. Stop beating your children. That's
take them to school.
Yeah, do that. That's
believe in education.
Yeah. So we had this belief that spare the rod, spoil the child kind of behavior. We had this belief that in order to have good children, we had to do corporal punishment of them. Well, that belief got embedded during institutional enslavement of Africans in the United States. White people used to beat us to keep us in line, and we learned that behavior, and then we adopted it and passed it on. That is not who we are. That is not what I intended to be. Be real clear that violence, beating a child, does not instill in them a sense of being able to navigate the world or confidence or intelligence. It's like it teaches some violence. So part of the internalized racism is that, interrupting that. And I don't want to blame parents for all this, but there's a piece that we all have to be responsible for. And then I'm never going to say that that it's not the systemic things that we deal with. It's the violence that we endure every day that we're responding to. It should be criminal that we don't have enough to eat. It should be criminal that we live in substandard housing. It should be criminal that we don't have adequate access to health care. That's criminal. And I don't want to just criminalize people who have a response to the systemic things that we endure, because that's just sort of
counterproductive.
Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate you, and I can't wait to see what the cohort does and what the next cohort does and how you create the youth one and the one for Black women and the one for Black men. Yeah, because all of those possibilities and needs exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just if anyone who's listening, watching this is interested, go to the Deaconess website. We are currently accepting applications for cohort 2. So I think the application's up until the end of May, and then we'll start. It's competitive. Let me say this: it's free. One of my visions is to make sure that this very rich training, this very deep and intense resource, that money would not be the reason anybody couldn't have it. So the Deaconess has generously agreed to underwrite the entire cost. Nobody has to pay anything to attend, other than, of course, your time. That's
and it's 3. How many weeks?
Yeah, it's 3 5-day sessions.
Yes.
That need to be covered. But everything, if you're interested, go ahead and apply. Don't hold up. And I am so enjoying watching the people who are in this institute find their voices and find their hearts and heal some of the things they didn't even know they were carrying.
Right.
Because, when people spontaneously start crying about something, it's like, well, I didn't know that was in there.
Like I did?
Like I do all the time.
No. Now, thank you so much. And again, I am so interested and intrigued and overjoyed to see the change, because as you heal people, that radiates. That absolutely radiates.
I hope, that's my hope and my vision is for it as well, Carol.
Rudy, thank you for joining me.
Oh, as I said, who tells Carol Daniel no? Of course. No, this is great.
husband.
This is great. You're amazing, and I'm just so happy I get to hang out with you. And thanks for making room for this conversation. That means a whole lot to me.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us on another episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. Don't forget to do what Rudy Nickens has done. He watches on YouTube, but he is also an avid, he said, viewer. And so you become that as well. We want every conversation that we have every week to be equally rich, because there is so much that we want to discuss to, as we say at 9PBS, change the narrative. That is, change the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And we will all be a richer community if we do just that. So subscribe, share, download, like this podcast, leave your comments. We'll respond to those. And again, share, because you know there's someone who could benefit from what you just heard here today. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel. We'll be back next week.
Listen St. Louis with Carol Daniel is supported in part by Midwest Bank Center, the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation, and Orvin and Latrice Kimbrough.